At some stage in a law firm application, you'll probably have to do a situational judgment test, or SJT. These are tests that set out a specific situation and ask you how you deal with it. In this video, I'm going to share 7 tips for SJTs so you have the best chance of getting past this stage. If you're new here, my name's Idin. I'm a corporate lawyer in London and a New York qualified attorney. I make videos about the law application process, my experiences as a lawyer, and that sort of stuff. So if you're interested in that, consider subscribing to my channel. I also run a newsletter called LITTLELAW, which helps aspiring lawyers get into legal careers. You can check it out if you want, it's linked in the description. So what is a situational judgment test? Well, basically it's a group of questions that set out some different scenarios and then ask you how you deal with them. Then based on the way you answer, the firm can see if the way you think is a good match for what they want. Usually you'll get these questions in some sort of online test, but sometimes firms will ask these questions in interviews too. The questions will probably be related to the job you're applying for. So for a lawyer, it could be something like, you're a trainee at this firm, a client phones you and asks you for an answer on a legal question relating to their work. You're unsure of the answer, but don't want to let the client down. What do you say to them? But sometimes the questions might not be law related because they're testing something else, like how you deal with a workplace conflict. In the computer test, you'll usually have multiple possible answers which you have to pick from or rank. And in an interview, obviously you'll just say what you think is the best approach. What makes situational judgment tests hard is that it's not always clear what the right answer should be or how you should approach it. So here are 7 tips that will help you pass these tests. My first tip is to read the SRA's Code of Conduct. The SRA is a regulator for solicitors, and this code is basically how you must behave as a lawyer. So this is probably the most important thing to keep in mind when doing SJTs, because if any answer goes against the Code of Conduct, it's 100% wrong. For example, you can get a question like this. You're a trainee acting in a dispute. You realize that the other side's lawyers accidentally sent you an email where they set out their whole case strategy for their client. What would you do? Based on the Code of Conduct, you shouldn't read the email, you should delete it and let the other lawyer know of the mistake. So if you said you'd have read the document to help your client, although that might seem like it's right because you're helping your client, it's definitely wrong because it breaches the Code of Conduct. The second tip is that you need to read up on the firm's values and culture. Sometimes they'll have a dedicated page on this, which is super useful, but if they don't, have a look on their website to see how they describe themselves and you'll pick up onto the keywords. Doing this will give you clues on what type of behaviors they want from their lawyers, and not all firms want the same things in their people. For example, firms with a big trainee cohort and super structured training contracts, like most Magic Circle firms, might value teamwork as an important skill. But maybe the London office of a US firm with much smaller teams and a smaller intake will want their people to work more independently. Tip number 3 is to remember your role. And what I mean by this is that you're being hired as a trainee lawyer. So unless the question says something else, keep that in mind when you're answering it. As a trainee, you'll probably be the most junior person in most of the projects you're working on. And you'll have responsibilities, but these will be different to what the senior lawyers should be doing. And you won't have the authority to make decisions for the firm. For example, you can't decide how much a client should pay for the work. That sort of stuff is for the partners. Now, that all might seem really obvious to you, but there might be some questions where there's an answer that looks really strong, but it isn't the right answer for a trainee to pick. Let's say you know that the firm has leadership as a value, and you're given a scenario where you're working on a case and you spot a major issue that could really affect the case. Now, you could choose to take control, solve the problem on your own, and tell the client what you've done, showing your initiative. Or you could tell your supervisor what you found and see if they agree and check if they want you to tell the client. The first option shows more leadership, right? But the second is more appropriate for a trainee to answer. My fourth tip is that if you're stuck, pick the answer where you over communicate. This is kind of similar to the last point. Usually the question assumes you're a trainee lawyer, and usually a trainee lawyer shouldn't be doing things they're unsure about without checking with a senior. So if there's a scenario like, you're a trainee at the firm and you discover a potential conflict of interest in a case you're working on, the right answer will almost always involve you telling someone more senior to you to get their thoughts on it. Don't worry about annoying this imaginary supervisor in this type of scenario. The bigger risk for the firm is if you think that you can just do everything on your own. Now, the next few tips are when you're given a situational question in an in-person interview. And my first tip for that is don't be afraid to ask for more context on the situation you've been given, especially if it's going to affect how you answer the question. For example, you might get a scenario like this. You're on your way to a meeting and halfway there, you realize you've forgotten to bring an important document. How do you deal with this? For a question like that, you can ask the interviewer whether the document was something that needed to be physically signed by a client at the meeting or if it wasn't. If it's something you physically needed, your answer might be that you arrange for someone from your office to bring the document while you discuss other things in the meeting. But if it's just a reference document that you needed to look at, maybe you could use a digital version on your laptop for the meeting. So asking for more information like this isn't cheating, because even the questions you're asking show how your mind works, and that's kind of the whole point of the test. The next tip is to state any assumptions you make. This is a bit like the last tip, because if you think there's information missing that affects how you'd answer the question, state your assumption for the scenario, then go through your answer. This way you can even give multiple answers to the question based on different assumptions. For example, maybe you've been given a situation like this. You're busy working on a lot of tasks and a partner asks you to do something else urgently today. Then you can share your assumptions by saying something like, assuming the work I was already doing didn't have a deadline of today, I could prioritize the new work today and complete the old work tomorrow. But if the work I already had was also due today, I would reach out to my supervisor on that work, tell them about the new task I've been given, and ask how they would like me to prioritize these two tasks. Stating your assumptions like this lets you give multiple answers for the same question, based on different assumptions. And it's still useful for the interviewers to hear, because the whole point of this test is for them to see your thought process. The final tip is for you to explain your thinking clearly and specifically when you're answering a situational question in an interview. That's because the interviewer is more interested in your approach to the scenario than what your final answer actually is. So explain your answer in stages, logically from the beginning to the end. For example, you can get a question like this. You've just received some harsh feedback from your supervisor on a piece of work you submitted. Your supervisor bluntly delivered their feedback and was clearly upset with you. How would you deal with this situation? Now, an answer you could give might be, I want to improve, so I'd accept their feedback and make sure it doesn't happen again. That sounds really positive, but it's not really telling the interviewer enough about what you'd actually do. A better answer would be something like, first, I'd take a moment to collect myself and my thoughts to avoid reacting emotionally. Then I'd acknowledge the supervisor's feedback, and if I wasn't sure, I'd ask for specific examples of what was wrong and how those could have been improved. Finally, I'd create a checklist which I'd look over in the future to avoid submitting work with the same mistakes. I would let my supervisor know that I'd added this step so they're aware that I've acted on their feedback. Ultimately, you're saying the same thing, but this answer is better because you're leading the interviewer step by step through your response so they can see exactly what you do in that situation. So those are my 7 tips to pass a law firm's situational judgment test. I know these tests can be hard and it can sometimes look like there's more than one right answer. So hopefully this video has given you some tools to narrow that down. I've also linked a bunch of practice tests in the description below in case you want to test out these tips. As always, let me know your thoughts by leaving a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a comment down below. And if you're doing applications right now, consider subscribing because I'm going to be putting out more application related videos too. For all you aspiring lawyers, I run a commercial awareness email newsletter called Little Law, which you should sign up for. It's completely free and you might find it helpful. The link to sign up is in the description below. Anyway, I hope this helped you out and I'll catch you next time.